Hey everybody, this is Sean with Tab Performance, and today I'm going to be installing our 2-in-2 head pipe on this 2003 Harley Ultra. For our first step, we need to remove the bags. I've already went ahead and did that. Once we have the bags off, then we can remove the mufflers. To get the mufflers off, we have 2 bolts up here on our floating bracket, and then we just have to loosen the clamp. So we'll back these 2 out. That should be a 1/2 inch. And then the clamp up at the front should be a 9/16. Alright, with the left and right hand muffler removed, next we can move up to the floorboard, and it's just 2 bolts holding it on. On this particular one, yours might be a little bit different because this head pipe does fit 1993 to 08 models, but on this one we have 2 Allen head bolts that are on the inside, so we'll just have to back both of those all the way out. And on this one, those 2 bolts are a 3/8 Allen. And on this rear bolt, there's not a whole lot of room to get a tool in there. So what works for me is I just use an extension and come in from the left-hand side with a universal joint that allows me to get up into that bolt. Okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and remove the necessary heat shields. The hose clamps that are holding on the heat shields, they're a 5/16 socket or a flathead screwdriver. Next, I'm going to remove this rear heat shield that kicks out to the left-hand side. There's 1 hose clamp here, and there's 1 more on the opposite side. Okay, so here's the rear one I was talking about. You can see that it's actually clamped over the top of this one here. So to get this one out, we'll have to take this one. There's just 2 of them, 2 hose clamps. Back both of those all the way out. And then the final hose clamp for this shield is just right at the Y split. So with that out of the way, you can see that there's a clamp that holds the left-hand pipe to the front section where this splits off. So we're going to loosen up that clamp, and then we're going to completely remove that left-hand side. And that clamp will take a 9/16 socket. With that clamp loose, all you have to do is just kind of wiggle this pipe out of the way. And one thing that will probably help is just to spray some WD-40 where they kind of come together. Because if you're removing this pipe from your bike is at least 12 years old, maybe up to close to 30 years old. So a lot of this stuff, if this is the first time it's coming off, it's probably going to be on there pretty good. So just take your time, use your WD-40, should just wiggle right off. Alright, just a couple more pieces of bracketry. You can see in here we have that support arm that the clamp was attached to. You can just remove the bracket all together. Just remove it all as one piece, and there's 2 Allen bolts holding those in. It should be a 1/4 inch, and those are pretty deep in there, so you might need a couple different extensions. But I'm just going to back those out and then we'll move on. Alright, with that bracket out of the way, next we'll just tighten down those bolts. And one thing you want to be careful of, there is a battery ground attached to that rear bolt, so just make sure that's back in place when you put the bolt back in. Next, we're going to get this rear section removed. So there is a clamp that holds this rear section to this front section, so we're going to loosen that up, and then we're going to make our way up to the head nuts, get those backed out, and then this whole piece will just remove itself from the front section. All right, with that clamp loose, again, here it'll probably help a whole lot to get some WD-40 in there. With that clamp loose and our nuts out up at the top, we're just gonna kind of work this back out. With the rear section out, then we can go ahead and loosen up our mounting clamp right here. That's just a 7/16 nut on the back and then a 7/16 bolt. We'll get that backed completely out. The front head might be a little bit more of a challenge if you have the lower fairing in the way, but the process is no different. And depending on how much room you have for that very front nut, that one is kind of hard to get to. So you may just need to use an open end wrench little bit by little bit. Or you might be able to use a smaller 1/4 inch drive ratchet with a smaller socket just to be able to get in there. It might make it a little bit quicker, but that one is the most difficult one to get out. I want to get this front one removed as well. That way we can, when we get the nuts out, we'll be able to back that flange all the way down and we'll be able to just rotate this header out of here. All right, now with the heat shields out of the way, you can see I can pretty much slide this flange wherever I want it to go. And really all we're doing is just rotating it out and then sliding it forward out of the bracket. You do have to, once you get it rotated out, you can slide it forward and then down, and then it should just slide right out of there. And then that'll expose the lower mounting bracket, which we'll remove and get rid of. All right, we have 4 bolts holding that bracket in place. To get to the very rear bolt, we'll actually have to remove our oil spout cover. So there's 4 bolts holding the cover on. They're a 3/16 Allen head, so we'll back all 4 of those out. And there is a gasket behind there, so it'll be a good idea to go ahead and replace that because that is a known spot for these to leak. With that out of the way, you can see the bolt that was covering. So we'll just go ahead and back these all out now. It's a 1/4 inch Allen. All right, and this very front one is a little tricky. You'll probably need a ball end Allen if you don't want to take this whole assembly off. But if you do have that ball end, you'll be able to back this all the way out. It is pretty tight. All right, so you do have to kind of finagle that front one out of there just to get it underneath our clutch cable line, but it is able to be backed out with that line in the way. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can do the same thing, but you'll have to take the whole transmission cover off. But unlike the newer models, this isn't just a decorative cover, it's the actual cover. So if you remove this piece right here, all your transmission fluid's going to be coming out. So if you do go that route, you'll have to replace all your transmission fluid along with that gasket in there, but that will make that bolt a lot easier to get to. Also, depending on your tools, if you don't even want to do any of this at all, you know, you could take a grinder to that bracket and just cut it off to where it's not in the way anymore. But the easiest way is just to use the ball end and just back it out. So then we're just going to go ahead and put them all back in. All right, now I'm gonna get this gasket surface cleaned up, get our new gasket in here, and then I'm gonna reinstall those bolts that hold in the oil spout cover. Alright, last step and we'll be on to the installation process. So the last thing we need to do is remove the header gaskets, and those are smashed in there pretty good, so it helps to have like some type of pick or some needle nose pliers or something like that. But sometimes they'll come out in one piece, or sometimes they'll just break completely apart as you're pulling it out, so it might take a little bit of doing, but we need to get those out of there. Alright, so the header system is going to come with everything you need to get it installed. We have our front and rear cylinder heat shields, our cross under with the cross under heat shield. We have our cross under bracket along with all the hose clamps that we need for the heat shields. We have the clamp for the cross under along with 2 new header gaskets, and then we do have 2 spacers for the floorboard if you need them to push the floorboard further away from the header if you're having clearance issues. Okay, now we can get the head pipe prepped. So it's a 2 in a 2 system. We do have that hidden interconnect or balancing chamber, whatever you want to call it, that's back there, so it does allow the 2 cylinders to work together, so it has the appearance of a true dual, but they are connected. So first thing that we're going to do, we have our heat shields here, front and rear cylinder. You can see on the inside they have little slots for our hose clamps. So there's 4 on the front, 2 on the rear, and then there's also 2 on the left hand side where the cross under kicks out. So we're gonna get those installed inside the slots. We're also going to install the wideband O2 sensor bungs. You can see here I have this copper crush gasket, and you only need to do this if you have a 93 to 2006 model. It could be 2007, but if your bike is equipped with wideband O2 sensors, you're not going to plug these. You're just going to reinstall your O2 sensors into these. But now I'm just going to go ahead and start feeding all the hose clamps through the slots. And again, there's 4 on the front, 3 on the rear, and 2 on the left hand side. And you do want to be kind of aware of how you're installing these, because if you do it one way, you might not be able to reach it with your tool when you get it to tighten it down. So just be kind of aware, put it up to your bike, see which way the best, which way is best for you to get it installed. Okay, now we're going to remove our stock retaining ring and flange, then transfer it over to the new header. Then we're going to get our new gaskets installed. And then we're just going to slowly seat this header into our gaskets and then line up our head bolts with the slots in our flanges. Alright, I have all the nuts just loosely on there for now. Now I'm going to go through and just verify that the header is seated squarely in the gasket, so we don't want to tighten that down if the gasket's crooked in there, because then we'll end up with a leak. So just make sure everything's square, then we can go back through and start to tighten the nuts down more, but we want to keep it just a little bit loose yet, so that way we have a little bit of room to work with when we get our cross under on. The cross under is going to bolt directly to the bottom of the oil pan, and our spacer is going to sit right in the grooves in the oil pan. And we're going to use the supplied bolts to sandwich the cross under to the spacers. The stock bolts holding on the oil pan are at the top where the pan sandwiches to the case, so we'll back the 2 rear bolts out on the right side, and then we'll do the same for the left. Next, we'll get our cross under clamp installed, and this is a very important step because it can't be done once it's been installed. And make sure to install it with the nut facing down and away from the bike, so that way we can tuck it away but still get a socket on it to tighten it down. Now we can slide the cross under to the header and wiggle it to where the brackets line up with the bolt holes in the oil pan. Then we're going to take our spacer and just set it right in the grooves in our oil pan. These bolts are a 7/16. Alright, so those bolts are in there. Now I don't have them completely tightened yet, so that way there's just a little bit of wiggle room left, so that way when I go and tighten down the nuts at the heads, it'll be able to kind of snug up the way it needs to get on there. So now I'm going to go back up there, get those tightened down, and then we'll come back down here. So what I like to do at this point is get the mufflers on before I do anything else. That way I can go ahead and do a start test just to make sure there's no leaks. As soon as I verify there's no leaks, then I'll go ahead and put the heat shields on and then the floorboard, and then we'll be done. Alright, now I'm just getting the heat shields in place, and if you're having trouble getting these hose clamps through here, one little trick you can do is just push them in there and make sure they're facing the way that you want to go, and then you have a hole in between the bracket. You just take a little screwdriver and just pull the clamp through. And then once the clamp passes the weld, then you should just be able to push it through. Alright, with the heat shields tightened down, then we can go ahead and put our floorboard back on. And again, they did come with spacers, and most models are going to need those spacers just to give yourself enough clearance from this front section of the head pipe. So make sure that those are in there. And just go ahead and bolt that back on. But that's all there is to it. So if you guys have any questions, shoot them down below, but be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out on Facebook and Instagram. And now let's go see how she sounds.